All right, everybody, welcome back to RCT Construction here on Houston Pleasant. This is a pretty special episode because we are moving into the final section of Houston Pleasant, at least the final section for opening day. So, as I mentioned, we're going to open with kind of four distinct areas. We have our downtown, we have our kind of family area, which isn't really themed to anything, and we have our kind of water ride area as well. And then we're going to move over here, which is going to be our our future themed area right here. And the nice thing about this future themed area, with the announcement that Premier Parks had purchased Six Flags from Time Warner, which I mentioned in my Houston Comet build, Fun Corporation is going to scale up what Houston Pleasant was supposed to be. The initial intention was to be a family park, and Zephyr was actually going to be the biggest coaster they had. However, with that, and knowing Astroworld sits on very valuable land in downtown Houston, directly across the street from the Astrodome and the Houston Texans Stadium. I think it's Energy Stadium, but I don't think that's the one that opened or existed at the time. But I could be wrong. If you know NFL history, please correct me in the comments there. But Fun Corporation can kind of smell blood in the water there. When you have a park on valuable land like that, and a new company that has a lot of parks, I mean, that could potentially be a disaster for fans of that park that sits on valuable land. A recent example, November 2nd, Six Flags America closed for the final time, and that land is now up for sale. Anyway, moving into our coaster, this is one you're going to recognize pretty easily. It's going to be a near clone of Xenon The Last Stand at Joyland. So we're going to ship our B&M track in. We're going to go ahead and get it repainted. We're going to give it that fancy orange track. And if you notice with this one, our rails are finally painted because in 1999, B&M finally started allowing parks to paint the rails of their coasters. So this one can be delivered with that, which is nice. So it is going to be very, very similar to Xenon TLS at Joyland. However, there are going to be some improvements because if we're going by history, this would be the final B&M Stand-Up ever built. In real life, the final B&M Stand-Up built is Georgia Scorcher at Six Flags Over Georgia. And the year before that was Riddler's Revenge at Six Flags Magic Mountain. And Riddler's Revenge was the tallest and fastest B&M Stand-Up coaster ever built. But we're going to take some elements from that, and we're going to modify the Xenon The Last Stand layout just ever so slightly. So I did some land modification here. I tried to record this once, but ran into some issues, so we're kind of going for a second shot here. But we're going to need to modify the land just a tiny bit as we go. But we're going to go ahead and get kicked off with our first drop, and I am copying a ride design out of my design world. So if we get some pauses here, or you hear me kind of talking like that, it's because I am copying a design because I have it kind of pre-set up. So instead of going with the kind of same drop that Mantis or Chang start with this kind of curve like here, which I really like and think looks really good, we're going to use the Riddler's Revenge style. We're going to start with a curve drop that's elongated. And what I think improves the design of a stand-up coaster with a drop like this is it takes way less pressure off the guest's calves or the rider's calves as you're going down this drop because it's not nearly as steep. So the pullout of the drop isn't going to be quite as intense. So we're going to go with that right there. So a nice long curve drop. We're going to do a 2 long valley, and then we're going to go ahead and pull up into the massive vertical loop. But rather than going to the left, like Xenon TLS at Joyland, we're going to go in to the right. So I'm just making sure the height is correct, and it is. And then we're going to go ahead and drop in. Now this would probably be a little bit more intense than what Joyland has. We're going to go straight into a curve. The reason I do curves like this is, while it doesn't look horribly smooth like that, I think it looks indefinitely smoother than that. Because that just looks like it would jolt horribly. If I'm building an aero coaster, that might be something I consider, but not for a B&M. So we're going to kind of try to make this a little bit smoother. We're going to angle out. And then this element is going to be pretty much carbon copy off what we did for Xenon TLS at Joyland into our large vertical loop down to the right. We are then going to go ahead and drop into our turn here. And this element is going to be the exact same as Xenon TLS over at Joyland. But what I want to do is kind of get my land set up here. Oopsies, that's a little too much. I want to get my land set up. Another thing, I mean, this land is very flat. The land that Houston Pleasant is on is just really flat. And I want to kind of keep that consistent, especially with the coasters, because building on an even keel is much easier than building on slopes. So while we have the opportunity, we still have a little bit of money left from our initial budget of $2 million. We're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to have one vertical, we're going to turn, and then we're going to do a little bit of a fake. And we're going to go into our turnaround here. And we're going to go around. Then we're going to drop back down with the medium turn into the larger turns. And then for now, I'm going to go ahead and pause, because I'm going to go ahead and build out my final brake run real quick, just to make sure the in-game supports line up where I want them to. So let's get rid of a little bit of that foliage. We can always place that back. So we want our first block brake to be here. We want 3 spaces, and then I'm going to use a booster in lieu of drive tires right here. So we're going to set them to the lowest speed we can. And then we're going to go ahead and build out a space and our second block brake. Another space into another booster, because we can't put drive tires on it. Wish we had drive tire sprites. I know the LSM, the Intamin based LSM coaster in game actually does have that. I kind of wish this had that too, but that's okay. So I have one brake there. We're going to do another one, and then we're going to go into our actual first set of final brakes. So this is going to be pretty much exactly the same as what's featured at Joyland. Although the space leading into it is going to be a little bit different, but we'll end with that piece right there. So our final brake run is in place. And then while I'm at it, I think I'm just going to go ahead and plop in the transfer track as well. So the transfer track on this ride is also going to be slightly different in comparison to what is featured on the one at Joyland, because the one at Joyland has 3 straight across. However, here, we're just going to do 2 across. So we're going to have this guy right there. We're going to have another one, which is going to be the same spot. Now, you may be thinking, is this ride just going to run 2 trains? That is not the case. So we're actually going to have them run the same amount. Although, unlike Xenon TLS at Joyland, we are going to color the track orange on these. And then the trains are also going to be a slightly different color. So the trains on TLS at Joyland are actually orange. The ones here are going to be yellow, or have yellow fiberglass bodies. But we're going to do a nice set of orange track with black supports. And then our final transfer track is actually going to rest right behind this one. And there are a couple B&M coasters that do this. As I was doing my research, Riddler's Revenge actually has a transfer track set up like this. Another famous version of this style B&M transfer track would be Gatekeeper. Actually features one very similar to this as well. But we'll go ahead and get these all set up. So with this being the future area, you may be wondering what we're going to theme this ride to. Well, we're actually going to be kind of uncreative with this one. So we're going to kind of use the popularity we built, or the company had built, with potential guests and attract them to the new park. We're going to name this ride the exact same way as the one at Joyland. So this will be Xenon The Last Stand. So it's going to have the exact same name. Again, playing off the fact that Funland has a ride called The Last Stand and Xenon 200. We just kind of threw them together at Joyland for Xenon The Last Stand, but it's going to be the exact same over here. So then the first transfer is going to be this one right here. So this would be transfer 1, just like that. This would be transfer 2. And then the one behind that would be transfer 3. So B&M coasters, if you ever do build a B&M coaster, it's pretty rare that B&M does not have the exact same amount of transfer tracks as they have trains for the ride, because B&M actually does recommend that you transfer all the trains off at the end of every operating day. So kind of something to keep in mind if you are building a B&M coaster. They do recommend that they do get removed after service every day. I think, although there are some that don't do that, I believe Thunderbird at Holiday World only has space for 1. So it's not a universal thing, but it is something you just kind of want to keep in mind. And then one thing I completely realized I have not done across the park, and this isn't something I'll address in this video, however, I have not set all the transfer tracks for the coasters here to wait for a full train just in case I accidentally open it, because if I open it, it won't move if it's set to that, but I also want to make sure I set these to never get inspected, because if you have them set to be inspected, you're going to lose a good fleet of your mechanics who are trying to inspect the transfer tracks that actually have no practical purpose in game other than looking good. But we're going to make sure the station is invisible, and we're going to copy the track pieces over so that it looks pretty. Oh, wrong track. That's the track we want. I want to make sure I'm careful here as well. So we don't want that track. That's the ground. That's the track we want. And we have our transfer tracks in place. Anyway, we'll continue into the layout here. So far, identical to what we have at Xenon TLS at Joyland, and again, identical to what Mantis at Cedar Point and Chang at Kentucky Kingdom would do, later known as Green Lantern. Rest in peace. We're going to go into our medium vertical loop, which is just kind of our placeholder for an incline loop. We're going to go into a space there. We're going to do kind of a fake out section between 2 large turns. And we're going to move on up into our mid-course brakes, which are going to be identical to the ones on Xenon TLS at Joyland. So we'll set the first 3 so they don't hit at all, and then we'll set the second set here. And I think I'll set these ones a little looser. The ones at Joyland are set to 13. I think this one will set to 18. One thing to keep in mind when building your mid-course brakes, when you build them here, keep in mind if an E-stop is ever pressed, leave enough space for a full train here, because the train would stop in the event of an E-stop here. When you press an E-stop on a coaster, in most cases, it's going to want to come to a stop as soon as it can. If it's coasting in the layout, it obviously can't because gravity's in charge, but once it would get here, it would slam to a stop. So if these are engaged, it's going to stop right here, and then we're going to use these as kind of the trims to trim off some speed. But I do like to leave a gap. You don't have to leave a gap. I just like to. Mantis at Cedar Point did not have one, but a ride like Green Lantern and I think Riddler both have gaps on their on their mid-course brakes, excuse me. Anyway, moving on, we don't want to do that. We actually want to go up like this. We're going to feature the same turnaround that Xenon at Joyland has. We're going to drop back down. We're going to have our on-ride photo section. There it is. And then we're going to go into our corkscrew, and I always get it backwards, but we're going to go corkscrew to the right, just like that. And then what I'm going to do is just give myself a little bit more space right here. And that should be enough. I'm actually going to want to raise this up a little bit as well, because our ride is actually going to be going out this direction. So the second half of the ride is where you're going to start to see the differences between this one and then the one at Joyland. Because on this version, we're going to go up into kind of a fake out turn here. So we're going to tilt over and drop straight down. Then we're going to turn. And all these elements, Xenon The Last Stand at Joyland does. However, we're just doing them a little bit out of order here at this park. Well, we're not even necessarily doing them out of order. They're in the same order, but just they're shaped a little bit different so that each ride does have its own identity. So they're not carbon copies of each other, which I like. And this is kind of something that you can kind of think about. If you ever watch a POV of Mantis or Chang or Green Lantern, as it's later known, watch those POVs side by side. The first half of the layout, literally the exact same, but the second half is where they kind of start to become their own rides. We're going to dip back down, do kind of a fake out there. So this, you could almost think of this as kind of a trick track, because the train's going to be tilted, go vertical, and then it's going to tilt again. So you get a nice element here. However, that could definitely be seen as a cause of headbanging as the ride were to get older. And then we're going to do another kind of fake out section here. We're going to go we're going to go from steep to level while still banked. We're going to level out, and then we're going to bank the other direction and drop down into a turn. And now we're going to head back into our final brake run. So just kind of keeping the land all level. I'm probably going to get rid of that tree. Leave it nice and open. And then we're going to angle back, have one vertical piece, or one straight piece, excuse me, head up, and there is our layout. So that is the layout for Xenon The Last Stand at Houston Pleasant. Slight differences between the one here and at Joyland, just in terms of an optics perspective. The one at Joyland actually has the station and lift hill closer to the parking lot. However, here, we're going to reverse that. So the station and lift are going to be closer to the park and the area that it's in. And then we're going to have the layout be closer to the highway. So as you're driving down the highway, you get a really good view of this ride going in. Not that we want to distract drivers, but we're kind of going to be doing that a little bit. And there you have it. So there is Xenon TLS, the layout. Let's go ahead and jump on over into the fitting out process and the time lapse. All right, everybody, it is time lapse time. Let's go ahead and jump right on into this. So we're going to start by placing the entrance and exit where I think they will work the best. They have the exact same placement as Xenon at Joyland, so not much different from that. And then a lot of this is just going to be copying over what we did at Joyland because we kind of want to keep that theme consistent. Although I will say the station will end up looking quite a bit different, but the colors on the catwalks for the final brake run are going to be the same. The consistency for the transfer track is going to be the same, so it's designed exactly the same way. When you're building with a specific manufacturer, one suggestion I would have is just try to keep it consistent for the era it's in. I mean, every once in a while, of course, manufacturers are going to get to the point where they upgrade what they do. But if you're in an era and you build a coaster, then build the exact same one a couple years later, just try and keep that building philosophy consistent with the next ride, because most manufacturers will do that, because why would you want to redesign absolutely everything year by year? And with this being, if this were real, this would be the final B&M Stand-Up coaster. Why would they go through all the trouble of completely redesigning everything? Especially when this ride is very similar to a previous ride they built. In fact, multiple previous rides they built between Mantis, Chang, and Xenon TLS, the original one. And this one also shares some similarities with Riddler's Revenge. So sad news, I was going to try to custom support this turnaround over the final brake run. Was not happy with the work it was doing. So unfortunately, I had to take out the scenery tool because I didn't want to individually... Well, I really don't have a way to remove the support blockers. So we had to go in and then use the clear tool and clear a lot of that out. But one thing it did do was I redesigned the top of the transfer track on that back side a little bit further, the third transfer, into a flat roof, so it was able to fit those two supports. And in some builds, if you go look at actual real coasters, the supports do go through the structures of some of these buildings. And then here we go, beginning the station. I tried to get a little bit creative with it. Watching Shark Tank kind of does that. Those entrepreneurs are pretty creative sometimes, and sometimes you want to be creative right back. Lore dump. But anyway, I thought this would be kind of cool. With this being Xenon The Last Stand, very similar to the one at Joyland. Joyland is kind of an early on rendition, while Xenon 200 is the earliest rendition where the meteor first hits. Xenon TLS at Joyland is kind of like we need to do something about this situation. And then this is kind of like we've made it outside. This is kind of our last ditch effort. We've gone to the alien world, and this truly is humanity's last stand. So I thought I'd do kind of a space-like station. The transfer tracks are not nearly as bright. They're a lot darker, more gray. And I originally went with that red color up top, although I do end up changing that to orange because I was not a fan of the look of it. I was trying to match it to the queue, very quickly realized I didn't like it, and then switched right back over to what I was doing. I will say, I was pretty darn happy with what I ended up with the final product that ended up being this station. I end up adding a skylight later on, but it's just unique. It's not something I usually do. So I thought it turned out really well with the land spike sticking out of it. And it does kind of look Outer World like this was something quickly thrown together in a last-ditch effort. And I think it does the job pretty darn well. Moving on to the most tedious process of building a steel roller coaster is doing the custom supports and the catwalks on the lift rail here. Doing it on a final brake run where it's flat is a lot easier. Doing it on these is also easy, but it gets very tedious when you have to go into the tile inspector and constantly modify everything. But you know what? I think the final product looks so good, we're going to go with it. And then as far as the supports go, I did what B&M would do. They're just going to copy and paste the design so you don't have to spend all that time redesigning all the supports. Around this time, B&M started to get a lot more minimalistic with their lift supports. But since Xenon The Last Stand, this is the exact same lift hill as the one in New York. Why changed it at all? And this middle post I end up having to replace because I put it in the wrong spot. But we'll get there. It's all right. Anyway, back to what I was saying. There's really no reason to completely redesign something. It's going to cost a little bit more materials, but in the scope of a brand new park for a company like Fun Corporation, it's really not that big a deal to spend a couple extra dollars on a ride like this. And I really like the look of these kind of stretched out supports. Again, I said this in the Joyland one, but the purpose for the supports like this is to kind of save on footers. But we end up just doing individual footers for all of them anyway. And then as you can see, we're going back here, and I literally wanted to copy and paste what was there at Joyland, and I just made I was off by about a tile, so I had to go back and replace some of the stuff. But we get it in place in no time here. And by no time here, I mean it took a lot longer in real time than it did here, because this is sped up about 1,000%. So no big deal now, but at the time I was kind of annoyed with myself. Talking about the layout itself, I mentioned before, this is kind of a mesh between Riddler's Revenge, Chang, and Mantis, just because we're using that curve drop, which will use a lot less stress on the rider's legs as they go down the drop. But another unfortunate aspect of this is after I get the catwalk all placed in and all that fun stuff, I don't like the way the normal supports look there on that first drop, so I'm going to go in and custom support the entire first drop here, which takes quite the process. And when it comes to custom supporting these drops like this, after the lift hill's over, with B&Ms, like I said, the lift hill supports are pretty minimalistic. But once you get to the drop, there tends to be a lot more support because there's going to be a lot more stress on the track. And you don't want to have too many gaps between where your supports are. And then when it comes to me building custom supports, I can't tell you how many times I'll end up off by like one tile of where I want something to be. So I have to completely rip down the entire support and then put the thing back because I'm just really bad at doing this. But in time, it ends up showing up and looking pretty nice. I think the final result of this first drop is actually pretty good. It's not something, I mean, It's something I'm going to spend a lot of time just staring at just because I like the look of the complexity of it. But again, if you're more a fan of just doing in-game supports, more power to you because it's way easier to do stuff like that. And I don't think it looks that much worse, or I mean, it really depends on what your viewpoint of it is. I don't think it looks that much worse. I just didn't particularly like how many of the vertical supports there were for this curved drop. And with the B&Ms, the supports typically have a vertical post and then a post that slants in towards the inside of the ride. We're just going to get these final supports placed in here. Again, I was off by a block, so I had to go back around and redo it. And then, of course, I had to go in and find out which support piece I used and then copy it. The copy tool in OpenRCT2 makes this process way less painful than it used to be, let me tell you. Because having to dig through all the supports there was kind of a pain, and it was not horribly fun to do. But once the supports are done like they are there, I did miss a footer down there. You can kind of see it in the corner near the bottom of the first drop. I do end up going back off camera, I believe, and filling it. And it might even be during the area construction, so it might be in this video somewhere. It's been a couple days since I recorded this, so... It's been a couple days since I recorded this and when I'm doing the voiceover, so... forgive me if my memory is not the greatest on this. But here we go, placing in the catwalk support rails. I try to keep everything as vanilla as possible. And then again, OpenRCT2 team, thank you very much for the ability to go in and do this. As tedious as it is, I think the final result does look pretty darn good, all in all. But anyway, just open up the tile inspector, you select the tile the walls are on, and unlike in the vanilla game, you can actually tilt these with the tile inspector. So as opposed to them being on land, you can select the angle you want them at as if it was on a piece of land, which is a really, really cool feature. And it creates, catwalks like this with just the vanilla sprites and vanilla stuff. You don't have to download a bunch of custom supports to make a catwalk like this. For the custom supports themselves, you would have to download something, but if you just don't really care about that and just want to use maybe like the wooden support structure, you can. I did that in the past when I was younger. I thought it looked pretty good, but I wanted to kind of advance it up a little bit. Now, moving on to the overflows for this ride. This is something I can't believe I didn't do earlier and just use land, because in OpenRCT2, you have the ability, if you connect your RCT1 install, you can use the textures. And one thing about RCT1 that was kind of convenient is instead of scenery, you could just use land to look pretty good. So I just did that here. So rather than have to build scenery all around this, just raise the land up a couple tiles and then use the type of landscape structure there to fit it in, make it look pretty nice once you get those queue overflows in. And then it kind of hides the queue overflows nice and easy. But I did end up leaving the outside of the queue lines out just so it's easy to open or close those overflows depending on the volume of guests that are in there. And then the entrance for this ride is actually going to be an exact copy of the entrance for the ride at Joyland. Although when we begin construction of the overall land, which we will here shortly, I do end up modifying it just a little bit to make it a little bit taller so it fit in a little bit better. And then right here, I wanted to put one more overflow in, just because it felt like if this park ends up getting really busy, there's not going to be enough room for the guests. In-game, probably won't matter a whole lot, because the amount of guests you get is directly tied to what rides you have, what their excitement and intensity ratings are, what those rides are. Whereas in real life, you look at a park like Epic Universe, which has a fairly limited number of rides, and it's not necessarily Universal's fault. You need to start somewhere. But the volume for that park is so big, and they have so few rides. And by few rides, I mean they have a lot, but there's just so many people that want to visit that park that still Universal is having to limit the amount of guests that go in there so that if you do visit, you still have a good time. When I visited Epic Universe back in October during Halloween Horror Nights, the park was crowded, but we were still able to do everything without express passes, which was nice. So, I mean, you just want to kind of be prepared for that kind of stuff. So I put a few overflows in, and the same thing with Houston Comet. Houston Comet actually kind of has a comedic amount of overflows that probably will never be used, just like Matugani or Green Diamondback over at Lost Island in Iowa. There's a comedic amount of overflows for that ride that just will never be used because they very much over-anticipated the volume of guests they were going to get. Last bits for Xenon The Last Stand is just adding in some foliage and then texturing the land. I cannot recommend enough when you're putting in trees. texture the land underneath so the trees all look like they have varying heights. One thing with RCT to keep in mind is, the trees are always going to be the same height. You put a bunch of the same tree next to each other, the height's never going to vary. There's a couple that have different sprites, but they're all going to be the exact same height. So vary the land underneath of it just to make it look like there's a little bit of differences. And then to finish up for the coaster here, we're going to add in a couple more theming elements just so it looks nice and neat. And that completes Xenon The Last Stand. Just shortly, we're going to go ahead and go through our transition into the actual build of the park section itself right now. So, funny story about building this area. So we're going to start with this kind of Main Street, I can't think of the term, midway area right here with a pond in the middle. But as I was building this, I finished it. I looked over at OBS and I noticed it was not recording. And I about had a heart attack. I was like, oh my God, did I just record that whole thing without recording it? Because that's hard to explain in a video. But fortunately, it did record. I think I just hit my shortcut on my keyboard right at the very end, so we get the majority of the area build in the time lapse. So that makes me really happy. So after completing that midway there, we're going to move on over to the motion simulators. So as far as this park goes, before it is scaled up due to the Six Flags acquisition by Premier Parks, these motion simulators were actually going to be in a building near where the entrance to Xenon The Last Stand is right now. But with the scale up of the park, we were able to redesign, because we've had a full 2 years almost to redesign this area and get the rides here. So with that, we're able to refocus where the motion simulators are. So they're going to be on the kind of Main Street part of the park here. And then the building itself is actually going to be connected to the Main Street buildings. So it works out really, really well. We're going to have different textured path in this area as opposed to the rest of the park, which typically uses just the normal asphalt. But I can tell you, when I put those queue lines in for the motion simulators, each one has 9 tiles. So I thought that ended up working out pretty well, all things considered. So in this area are the final planned flat rides for the park for opening day in May of 2000. We're going to go ahead and get these walls put in just to kind of section off the area a little bit and make it look like it's kind of its own isolated area, like we're in another world, which I think looks pretty good. From that main midway, it might look kind of but I put a couple trees in place just to kind of hide the walls a little bit better, just because I wasn't sure how it was going to look. And then we're doing the same idea we had for Double Drop Falls and Orca Expedition for the entrances. And then I spoke about Epic Universe earlier. I really like the portal concept they have going on where you walk through portals to get to each area. So I kind of did the same thing for Future World here. And Future World, the name, of course, coming from the scenario Future World, which Brian and Dreslick just happened to be playing not that long ago, right before, as I was looking for inspiration for what to name this world, he was doing his scenario playthrough of the RCT scenario Future World. And I decided, you know what? That's pretty good. So I ended up going with that just to kind of pay homage to the original RCT, because I can't tell you guys where I'd be without that game. That game led to my status as a coaster enthusiast. It absolutely sucked up most of my time when I was a kid. So, I mean, I owe the world to this game. I cannot tell you how much I love this game. It's so simple, so much fun. If you're watching this video and have not played it, grab a copy. You can get a copy of it for like $5 on Steam right now, I think, if you really want to. But anyway, continuing, we're putting in the buildings. We put a little bit of rock texture on the inside of the paths just to make it feel kind of like it's out of this world a little bit. Give a little bit of an ominous vibe on the inside there, and then we match it with the exit, and then we complete the hangar bay around the motion simulators, of which we have 3. And then we're going to come in here, we're going to place a chair swing ride, and this is going to be a full-size one. So the ones at Funland and Joyland are actually supposed to be chance rides yo-yos, which have 1 seat in a row. And this is supposed to be more like a Zierer, I believe it's called. I can't think of the model name off the top of my head. It'll probably show up here in a little bit. But I know the Zamperla version is called a flying carousel, but that's not the Zierer version's name. But this is supposed to be a Zierer version. A wave swinger. That's it. I knew I'd find it. But it's supposed to be more reminiscent of a Zierer wave swinger as opposed to what we ended up calling it here. So I end up theming, the Scrambler right now is orange. I do come back and kind of change that a little bit. But before we do that, let's go ahead and put in a meteor rock, like what is featured at Funland in Xenon 200's Turnaround. I just thought it would be kind of cool to have one of these here. Very reminiscent. Obviously, we don't have as much room to play with it. So we just kind of have to make do with the space we do have and put a smaller meteor in place. And then just kind of texture the land around it. And then add a little bit more to it right there. And I wanted to make sure that that kind of Martian texture, not the red sand, had a little bit of play with the land just to give a lot of texture. And then moving on over here, we're going to put our area food stand in. Every area of the park has some sort of food stand to keep guests kind of happy with wherever they go. Much like, you know, any place you really go to, you usually are pretty capable of finding a major food location in a major area. Kind of forgot what I was going to say heading into that. My bad. But either way, this food stand I think ends up looking pretty good. The only thing that might be not great about it is it doesn't look very good from the queue line for our wave swinger there. Not the end of the world, but I think on Xenon The Last Stand side, from that portal side, from the Scrambler side, it actually does look pretty good. Again, my buildings are pretty blocky, but I tried to add it with, tried to kind of hide that a little bit with the 2 points on either end of the entrance, just to give it a little bit different vibe. But we're going to texture the land around the flying carousel as well. Not flying carousel, I did it again. Texture the land around the wave swinger is what I was looking for. And then we're going to put a little bit more fence here, get a little bit more seating on the outside for guests to go have a spot. And then we're going to just continue texturing this land and get this whole thing feeling like its own universe, essentially. We're going to get the fence replaced. I end up liking that fence a lot more than what I had in place. Texture the land a little bit more around Xenon's queue line there. Texture the land here. And then once the land is all textured, I'll have to rebuild some of that fence. But then we're going to go ahead and go into the scenery tool, and we're going to use foliage. However, it's going to be more alien-like foliage that we end up placing in this section of the park. Just to kind of give it, again, that extraterrestrial, out of this world feel, because I wanted to give an advancement from the story of Xenon at Joyland to the story of Xenon at Houston Pleasant, just because I want to keep that story continuing, and it kind of gives coaster enthusiasts a reason to visit all three of these parks, because you can go to Funland and get the first part of the story, you can then travel to Joyland and get the second part, and then you can go to Houston Pleasant when it opens and get the third part. Fourth part is up in the air, so we'll see what happens when it comes to that. But I really am happy with the way this area ended up turning out. I could not be happier. I think this is by far the best land I've put together for this entire series, I think. I think guests are going to get in there and get so immersed, and it's going to look so good. But anyway, our footage is going to briefly stop there because that's when I hit that keybind and it stopped recording. But we are going to put some of that alien foliage in just to make it look a little bit different from the rest of the park. But thank you all for tuning in for the construction of the final area, Future World at Houston Pleasant. Next up is going to be putting in some of that detail work, getting benches and trash cans placed around, getting some restrooms placed, and then hiring the staff, and then the park should be ready to go. But thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all later.